You're listening to Journey for Truth with internationally known medium, Tai Yi practitioner, and radio host Tammy Urbanic.
Hello and welcome to Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. I'm Tammy Urbanic. Thank you so much for joining me. Journey for Truth Radio is always on demand and with many new episodes. My website, empowermentthroughhealing.org, is available to peruse through, and also you can sign up for my free newsletter. And also on Amazon.com, you can do a search for the book, The Joy of Self-Healing. This book was inspired by Haska Harrison and Jonah, and it's full of recipes on how to heal many areas of your life and different areas of your physical body, full of information, great information. Amazon.com, The Joy of Self-Healing. My guest this week is Shenandoah Shefalo, author of Garbage Bag Suitcase, a memoir. Shenandoah spent much of her childhood in broken homes, broken foster homes. And today she's going to share with us her experience and what she feels needs to be changed. Shenandoah, welcome.
Thanks for having me on today.
It's great to have you. Now, how did you end up in the foster care system?
Well, I actually self-reported myself to foster care at the age of 13. So after kind of living a nomadic existence with my biological mother for numerous years, 13 years, my mom kind of disappeared from my life after I had spent some time with family over the summer. And I had to self-report myself to foster care in order to avoid becoming homeless.
Wow. So you spent some time with family over the summer, and when you came home, she had split.
Yep, my mom had disappeared. She was kind of known for disappearing, but this was kind of one that lasted a little bit longer than I was expecting. When I actually flew home from that trip, I went to my grandmother's house, my mom's mom, and stayed with her for a few days, but that was becoming more and more apparent that my mom wasn't returning, and that the only option was to report myself to care.
So they came in and had you pack up your belongings and then took you to the first foster care home they had available?
Yeah, I technically had no belongings with me because I had flown back from some relatives. So I had what was kind of in my backpack from that trip. Reported myself. I had a biological aunt who initially was a foster parent herself, who I stayed with initially on that emergency basis. And then kind of once the court system and court case got going, and then I was placed into care permanently. And then I ultimately aged out of foster care at 18.
So when you chose to call foster care kind of on yourself, did you have an idea in your mind of what that would be like, kind of what you were walking into?
Yeah, I think I convinced myself, I grew up where we were very distrustful of the police and of authority, which probably isn't hard to believe. And so it was a difficult decision for me to call the police, right, to get the authorities involved. But I had convinced myself that that would be my fairy tale ending. 13, right? You think you have all the answers at 13? At least
I did. I don't know.
Yeah, right? Everyone does. And so I really convinced myself that going into foster care, that somehow these parents that the state chooses would be kind of these brilliant people, right? They would be the best parents that the country had to offer.
That they would care.
Yeah, because they were signing up to be parents, right? So these were going to be like the best people ever. And so I had really convinced myself that this would be my fairy tale ending of going into the foster care system, that I could escape kind of the abuse and drama of my family life and my household. And I was finally kind of getting my Cinderella moment. At least that's what I thought.
Right. And I can certainly see that assumption, that expectation. If families are signing up and they're choosing to be a foster family, of course they must care about the children. And, any 13-year-old is not going to understand, unless they've already experienced it, that foster families are paid to have children come in.
Yeah, I wasn't really aware of all the intricacies of the system until it was kind of too late. And so people ask me all the time, so if you had to do it again, would you make the same choice? And I answer the same, which is, I don't know. I don't know if I made the right choice. It's just the choice I made. So it's one of those things I could never undo it at this point. But if you put me back as that same 13-year-old girl with this information, I don't know if I would make the same choice.
So your relatives then did not want to raise you, I'm guessing.
Yeah, my aunt was a foster parent, as I mentioned at the time, but she was taking teenage boys. And so I was the only teenage girl then in that home. And so that was causing issues. But again, caused kind of another issue for me because it felt like another failed placement. It felt like another failed time I didn't fit in, that I didn't live up to what I was supposed to. It felt like I wasn't good enough, that time again I wasn't doing enough to stay or to be in a place I loved. And so that placement did not work.
Now, your mom, you stated that you aged out at the age of 18. Did your mom ever return, or was she in and out, in and out?
I've not seen my mother. She came back once while I was living at my biological aunt's house. I saw her once. She indicated she was moving. She asked me to move with her when my case had first started. I made the decision that I wouldn't do that. She was making yet another move. I had moved already over 40 times with my mother.
Wow.
From everywhere from California to Michigan. I've pretty much lived everywhere in between. And so I had said no, I wouldn't move. And I've actually not seen my mother since that day.
That must have been really, really hard as a kid. You know, I think every child wants their mom, they want their dad. That's an innate desire. And then when it's not happening that way, it really creates a lot of hurt, anger, frustration. Is that what you experienced?
Yes and no. And I try to explain this to people the best I can. And it's, you know, I never felt that my mother abandoned me. It's an interesting thing. I felt as if I abandoned my mother. So it's a really complex relationship in that, you know, I had taken care of my mom for a lot of that time. You know, between substance abuse and failed relationships that she had had, I became a semi-adult and friend to my mother. And so I was really good at taking care of her. And when I made that decision to report myself to care, I felt like there was kind of a lifeboat for one coming by. And instead of giving it to my mom, I gave it to myself. I saved myself from the wreckage. And so I had a lot of guilt about that for a lot of years. And it was something I didn't understand about my own guilt in that situation for a long time. And I think that goes misunderstood for a lot of foster kids, that we sometimes feel like we let our own parents down or we somehow abandoned them. And I think it's why it's hard for foster kids to sometimes enjoy life, even in a good, happy foster home.
Right.
I just had foster parents share with me that they had a foster son that they threw this birthday party for, and he really liked Minions. And so they went all out with a cake and decorations. And it seemed like he was having a lot of fun. And then afterwards, there were some behavioral concerns. And it was interesting because all I could think was the way that I felt, which was like, you're cheating on someone. Like I've always felt like I was cheating on my mom if I was enjoying it too much. And I think that's a hard feeling to explain when you're that person in that situation. Like, well, I shouldn't be because my own mother couldn't do this for me, so I can't really like what you're trying to do for me.
I certainly understand that, and I see where you're coming from in that from a child's perspective, there might not be that cognitive, conscious understanding of exactly what you're feeling and have the ability to articulate that effectively so that whoever you're with can understand, okay, well, that's why you're feeling down, or that's why you're not wanting to participate. Now, in the work that I do with people on a day-to-day basis, that makes total sense to me. I hear that a lot, that you have this guilt or you have these other emotions that are not logical per se, or they're not perceived as logical. And it can become difficult for a teenager, especially a 13-year-old, to really express that. So going back to, you had kind of a fairy tale expectation of the foster homes that you were going into. What was the reality of what you walked into?
The reality was I was alone in the world of strangers. So this is why I say I don't know if I could make the same choice, right? The devil you know is sometimes better than the devil you don't know. So I had become quite adept at dealing with my mom's disappearances and her substance abuse and mental illness and crazy boyfriends. I knew how to navigate that world, and I was good at it, and I had built those skills up. But then that was all stripped away, and I was put into a home of complete strangers with complete different expectations. And I didn't know how to fit into that. And so I felt completely isolated. The only thing I can compare it to is just getting on a plane and going to a foreign country where you don't know the customs, you don't speak the language, and you have to fend for yourself. No Google Translate, right? Just you trying to figure it out. And that's really hard. Families are complicated places with their own inner workings, and each one is unique and different. And it was really hard for me. And so there was a lot of faking and pretending. Just go along with the flow, because then you'll try to figure this out as you go. And you kind of lose yourself when you do that. And so there was a lot of years spent pretending to be something I wasn't, trying to fake it, because you're also afraid that if you don't do the right thing, they might ask you to go to a new placement. So there's all this push and pull that's going on. And as a teenager who's still just trying to find themselves, right? Who's trying to gain independence, who wants to hang out with friends and go to prom, right? Like those are the big things.
Right.
And you're trying to kind of suffer through, where do you fit in this world when you have no one? It was a really lonely existence.
And I have met people who experience that even in their own biological family, but probably not the same way that you experienced it, because as you stated, you moved in with strangers. Literally, you moved in with strangers. Yeah. And did you have any, well, let me back up. Did you jump from home to home? Did they keep moving you from home to home, or were you with the same one?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to, for the 4 years of high school, be in the same home. I was lucky in that sense, and maybe not so lucky in that I was able to just start faking it better and better, I think. And I knew I was faking it, and as I got older, it got harder. You know, when you start hitting 17 and you're just ready for that independence. And then I turned 18 in December of my senior year of high school, which at that time meant you're done. So the middle of December in Michigan, it's cold. And so I had to negotiate with my foster family to stay so I could graduate from high school. And so then this whole thing of money comes in, and kind of realizing you're a commodity. And that's when that really became apparent for me. I knew my foster parents had been receiving funds for me, but this idea of myself as a commodity really hit me when I turned 18. And then I basically negotiated that I would pay them the same that the state had been paying them if I could stay until May so I could graduate.
Wow.
And so when that happens to you and you realize you can kind of trade your life for dollars, it's an interesting, journey for yourself and how you can try to overcome that. And it's something that I tried to run from a really long time. I just denied that it existed, and I denied myself those feelings because they were so painful. And so it's how I kind of came to this book, is that I actually told no one after I turned 18 that I was in foster care for 20 years. I just didn't admit it to anybody, didn't let anybody know. And it's funny how little we know about the people around us.
Exactly. So how did they make it apparent? Did they simply state, you can't stay here anymore because we're not getting any more money? I mean, was it that point?
Yeah, there was a lot leading up to it. As you kind of get closer to 18, everyone's like, okay, you got to start making some decisions about your living arrangements and what you're going to do. So it was a very open conversation that you're turning 18 and you need to either move out or get something figured out. And so I had this brilliant idea that if I continued to pay them, would they let me stay so I could graduate from high school? I didn't have really any other choice. If I rented an apartment near my high school, I wouldn't be able to get to my job. So there was a lot of stuff. I lived in a rural area, so transportation was an issue. So I was fortunate enough that they agreed to it so I could stay.
That is very fortunate. And I know that there are many children out there and youth who are not that fortunate, who find themselves in foster homes, at worst, where they end up dying. And then there are foster homes that are absolutely loving, like the one you mentioned with the Minions and the birthday cake. And then there's everything in between. I guess much like biological families as well.
Right.
So have you heard stories in which there have been some other kids kind of caught up in foster care homes where there was a lot more going on in terms of abuse or neglect or just indifference?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everything from sexual and physical abuse. I definitely felt emotionally abused. There was definitely different standards in our home for biological children versus foster children. But, I know people who have been sexually abused in foster homes, physically abused in foster homes, children who became homeless at 17 or 18, kids who have run away from those situations, who have been then have turned towards sex trafficking and those types of things. So there's definitely plenty of horror stories to go around about what happens to foster kids who are particularly vulnerable at 17, 18, and 19 because the choices are very limited for what they can do. And every state is different. So all of those things factor into why I wanted to write this book, because I really got interested in this topic because I eventually went to college and started working in a law office, and I became intrigued with the idea of why people are incarcerated. And I started talking to our clients and realizing that most of them had been former foster youth. So a couple of Google searches later, you start to find out, well, for boys, almost 80% will have a felony record before 19 and a half. So there was a lot going on with this transition from foster care to real life, right? And having no safety net. Most of my friends now who have 18-year-olds or older still say, oh, I couldn't imagine my child being completely on their own. Now, we're still supporting them. We're still helping with laundry. We're still paying for gas. We're still, they come home for the holidays. There are a lot of children every day who do not have that as an option. And that's scary.
It is scary. I can't imagine that either. My daughter is 22 years old. She's just moved out on her own last fall. And at the age of 18, there was no way she could have moved out on her own. First of all, she didn't have the money. But second of all, she didn't have the know-how, the skills. So I can't even imagine just pushing someone out the door just because their birthday happened. That really... that saddens me. It really saddens me a lot. So you were stating that you experienced emotional abuse and that there were different standards between how you were treated versus the biological children. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, there were just different rules, different expectations, the way birthdays were celebrated, the gifts that appeared under the tree at Christmas. Oftentimes my birthday was overlooked. There was never a birthday cake for my birthday. Those little things over time can really add up. And it took me a long time to understand how much they affected me, because I used to think, oh, I don't really care about my birthday. And I realized maybe I do care about my birthday, right? But it took me until my 30s to think that. Because no one had ever made a big deal out of it. My mom was rarely home for my birthdays when I was little, and then the foster care experience of nobody really celebrating your birthday, it's those types of things that can eat away at you as an individual, that you think, wait, why are all these people making such a big deal about their birthday? It's not a big deal because that's the lie you've kind of told yourself to make yourself feel better. And then you realize these little lies that you've been telling yourself to try to get through and to kind of recover from this trauma you're experiencing are only hiding the stuff that you need to work on. And then you realize, wait, I do want to celebrate my birthday. I just have never done it. So you don't even know what emotion to have. People sometimes say, well, what do you think about foster care? What's different about people from foster care? And so there's a group of us that get together as a little support group. And I was bringing up how I really enjoy giving gifts to people. I love finding just the right thing for just the right person. But how I feel like I'm a really bad gift receiver. I never feel like I have the right emotion. Even if I really love the gift, I feel like I have a hard time expressing that. And I feel like I'm always disappointing the person who's giving it to me. And so it's something I try to avoid. I try to avoid opening gifts in public. It's interesting how those little things affect you and create who you are as an adult.
Absolutely. How did they treat you? They treated you differently in terms of the birthday, but in terms of emotional abuse, did they talk down to you? Did they insult you?
Yeah, it was this idea. So Cinderella is waiting to turn into the princess, and I always felt like I was waiting to turn into my mother. So there was this constant expectation that sooner or later, I'm going to be my mother. I'm going to become a drug addict, a teen mom with these mental health issues. And so that expectation of, well, that sounds like something your mother would do. Or, any thought that you have that you try to share is downplayed, or any emotion you have is wrong or incorrect. And that, oh, that's something your mother would say, or, oh, you shouldn't act like that. That's what your mom would do. You're constantly fighting that push and pull of, well, do I really feel that way or don't I feel that way? Because it's never validated. Any emotion you have is always wrong. And I think that type of emotional abuse is what makes it even harder than at 18 when you're fresh out on your own and left to your own devices to do whatever you want.
It is disappointing that there is not some sort of service that offers like a bridge between leaving foster care and entering into adult years. Most family, well, I don't know if most is the right word, but a lot of families offer that bridge of support. And like you were stating, foster care families, it would need to be offered voluntarily there because there's no monetary compensation. So if a child is going to be placed in foster care through state or county services, then I think that there needs to be some sort of bridge gap there to assist, but it's not. And you are one of the minorities in terms of graduating high school, I believe, and then going on to graduate college.
Yeah, so 500,000 kids are in care every day in this country. We know that there's about 25,000 plus who age out every year. Of those, less than 3% will go to college. Less than 1% will graduate from college. We think the numbers who actually graduate from high school are somewhere between 20 and 30% who will even graduate from high school without getting their GED, so just a straight diploma graduation. And there's some programs. Some states are trying to do some stuff with that bridging, and they're trying to extend the age of foster care to 21. There's some issues with that. It's not a perfect system. They see that it's an issue, which is good. But the issue is, and I explain it this way, is that if you were in prison, if you committed a crime and they said, listen, Tammy, you can stay in prison for another 3 years, and we will give you all these services, and we'll help with job reintegration and education and all of these things. Or you can leave now. You would choose to leave now.
Yeah, you would.
Most people would say they would. And that's kind of what's happening with this foster care extension, is that in the states that do offer it, these kids are still 18, and so they have a choice if they're going to stay till 21. And most of them are so depleted by the system. Because you have to understand there's very specific rules for foster care too. Foster kids do not get the same advantages that other kids. Things like sleepovers are mandated, and whether or not the home you want to have a sleepover in is also a licensed foster home. Pictures, taking photos of foster kids, you're not allowed to do that. Cutting hair, all of that has to be court approved.
Wow.
And so it becomes difficult, especially I think as you get older, if you weren't adopted out of the foster care system. Most older kids are not adopted. That you're just tired of people telling you what to do. And so especially when you hit 18, most 18-year-olds in traditional families are tired of their families telling them what to do.
True.
So especially for kids who are getting mandated on every little thing. Oh, you want to go on a school trip? You have to get a judge's permission to do that. You're kind of worn down and you're just ready to be done. So the idea of signing up for 3 more years to ask for permission to do these things is not something most kids are signing up to do. And then they're missing those services.
Right.
Do most kids probably regret it once they're 21 and they look back? Probably. But, it's already a transitional time for kids. So we're still looking for a system that will work and help bridge that.
What is the biggest thing that you see needs to change within the foster care system?
Well, so many things that I'm not sure we have time to talk about all of them, but simple things. The fact that there's not continuing education for foster parents is something that really bothers me and kind of gnaws at me. Almost every profession in this country mandates continuing education credits, from hairdressers to, nurses. And foster parents don't have that. Kind of once they're licensed, they're licensed. But every person is different and unique, and especially when you're dealing with someone who has come to the system because of trauma, right? Most children don't come into the foster care system because everything was going well at home. There's been a trauma that's occurred. And I think most foster parents do not have the training and experience to deal with that. And I think there needs to be constant training for that. That's just something to me that seems simple that we could be doing right away. I also feel like we could be doing matching of kids to parents better. Right now, it's kind of a, where is there a bed available, and we'll dump a kid there. And I think that's unfair to foster parents as well as to these kids, because not every kid is a right fit for a family and vice versa. Why you'd want to take a kid who maybe loves soccer and being outdoors and put him in a family who loves to read by the fire, just because they had a bed available this week, that's going to make for a bad placement. And ultimately that child's going to be moved. And it tends to be a reflection on the child, which in no way should it be. So those are like simple things I think we should be thinking about. And then there's long-term solutions, like looking seriously at adverse childhood experiences and the study that was done in the 90s, and understanding how we can build resiliency in kids, doing things like the Krosnor School, which is a boarding school for foster kids.
Oh, interesting.
Who they're just doing amazing, amazing things with the kids that are coming to their school. And the results they're getting are phenomenal by any educational standards. And, I think we should be looking at more and more placements like that and replicating some of those good models more frequently throughout the country.
I completely agree. And it's around every year, around the time of the football season, that I see everyone getting so excited and so pumped with their football team and watching the football games. And I often think, if people were this excited about humanity, what if people were this excited about children and our future as a humanity, as a group of human beings? What if people were excited this much about our climate and our earth and our foods? Our world would be so different. And people get so caught up in football, which is fine, but what about exactly what you're talking about? What about change? What about caring about kids who have found themselves in a position where nobody cares about them?
That they didn't choose, by the way.
Exactly.
I think that's a big misconception, is that, one of the questions I get a lot is, well, did you run away from home, or what was your issue? And it was like, listen, this wasn't my issue that landed me here. I'm now dealing with these issues as an adult, but it wasn't my issue that landed me there in the first place. But this is 500,000 children just in the United States that are dealing with this, that are in trauma. And I explain to people this way. In those that's 500,000 people. That could be, one of those children could be our cure to cancer. One of those children could be the link for world peace, could have the idea to stop climate change. We don't know what those children are capable of. And are you willing to just let that go on the possibility that there's nothing there? Because right now you're saying those children don't matter. Those 500,000 kids, there's nothing we can do. We've been under this system of foster care for a really long time. Orphanages were the last change we had. We haven't had any real changes to the foster care system, and the results are getting worse and worse. We know that there's a 94% recidivism rate. That means as a child of foster care, there was a 94% chance that my own children would wind up in foster care.
That's amazing. I did not know the number was so high.
Yeah, so we are growing this problem, right? This isn't getting smaller. This is getting bigger. And for me, it's getting down to those 10 things on the Adverse Childhood Experience quiz, understanding them as a community and understanding that we can heal trauma and build resiliency in these kids. That will change our country.
Exactly. And I find a lot of people like to jump to a label. That kid's a troublemaker. That kid is a jerk. That kid only cares about himself or is selfish. And I always question those labels, because if a youth, a teenager, a child is struggling, is getting in fights, is stealing, is doing something that's getting him or her in trouble, well, there's always going to be a reason behind it. There's always going to be something that has occurred or is occurring that's creating that behavior. And it really bothers me when I see people just jump at these labels, or that kid is stupid or whatever because he's acting like this. Well, let's maybe figure out why that behavior is going on. And it's exactly what you're talking about. These kids in foster care, for the most part, or all of them, have experienced a trauma on some level or another, and that needs to be acknowledged. And I love what you stated. Foster parents need to be trained in that.
Yeah, for me, it came down to this one simple question in my own mind: was I willing to change? So, fast forward in my life, and I was working in criminal defense law office with adult criminals, right? And so it started to just be this repetitive pattern that I saw, and you would think, okay, they've committed this crime, what's the best plea deal we can get for them? Let's just work it out. And I said, there's something more to this, because the people started to be the same. They just had different names, really. Uh-huh. And I thought, there's something more at play here than what I'm giving this credit for. And so I started asking people about how they grew up. And so again, I heard this foster care connection. And then it really dawned on me, we have to stop asking, what's wrong with that person? Mm-hmm. Why is that person acting crazy? What are they doing? That's something we say a lot in just our daily lives. What's wrong with them? Gosh, look what they're wearing, right? This mm-hmm. judgment.
Right.
And start asking, what's happened to them? Mm-hmm. Because once you allow someone to tell you their personal story and their personal journey, all of a sudden these behaviors that didn't make logical sense. Why is this woman stealing from Walmart, when right. she had money in her purse? This doesn't make any sense, right? Mm-hmm. Then you say, well, what's happened to you? And you start to hear the journey of what they've been through. Suddenly it makes sense why they're having these behaviors, right? You see their trauma exactly. in a whole new way. So it's this simple jump from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. And I think if we all started asking that question more, we could really get a grasp on trauma.
Exactly. I completely agree 100%. And your book, A Garbage Bag Suitcase, does your book give more information regarding this, go more in depth? Is it your memoir?
Yeah, it's both. I kind of say I'm the accidental writer. I didn't mean to write a book. It just sort of happened that way. But yes, I share my story and my journey. But I didn't want the book to end there. There were lots of books on foster care that are great, that are probably better than my book. But what all of those books left me with at the end was, well, now what?
Yes.
And I wanted to be able to answer that question in my book. So I share my story and my journey, and then I take it a step further. Let me tell you about the statistics. Let me tell you about other kids in the system. Let me tell you about some of the lasting impacts as an adult that this upbringing's had in my life and the difficulties that I have day-to-day living. Even though I'm successful and have a beautiful family, there's still day-to-day struggles I have that stem from this. And also, what can I do? What can you do? What can your listeners do? There's something for everybody. Whether you want to become a foster parent or an adoptive parent, or whether you just want to be better educated and you can spread better messages with better information, we need all of those people at whatever level they can get involved.
Exactly. And that is the whole purpose of this show, Journey for Truth. It is to bring awareness to topics such as this, such as foster care. So I'm so glad you were on my show this week. It's great information. What is your website or where can people purchase your book?
Absolutely. The website is super easy, www.garbagebagsuitcase.com. You can purchase it via a link there. You can ask for it at all of your local bookstores, and you can also get it on Amazon. And from the website, you can sign up for a newsletter or send me an email directly. I love to take questions.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Shenandoah, for being a guest on my show this week.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here as well on Journey for Truth on iHeartRadio and YouTube. Until next time, have a fantastic week.